Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining me from. Welcome to another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. Thanks for those of you that are joining us live. I know we are an hour earlier than our normal time. I appreciate the flexibility from my live viewers. That's actually because there's a special project going on this week, something pretty exciting, and it's taken my 9 o'clock slot every day this week. So it's something that, if everything goes well, we'll hopefully be able to talk about pretty soon. But that's the reason I had to shift just this one time. So hopefully my audio is good today as well. Considering the ongoing challenges I've had with the audio setup, I once again did a test just before I started live streaming, and everything sounded good. I found some setting changes that I made in my streaming software, so hopefully that did the trick. So for this week's episode, we want to actually pick up where we left off last week. But before we do, I have a couple little news items that I thought I would share. Just a little promotion of a couple things going on in the community that I thought would be of interest. Loud and clear. Good. Yes. Excellent. First thing I want to talk about is there is a new open SAP course for the cloud application programming model going on right now. It just started its second week. I've been taking it as well. I've already taken week 1 and week 2. Just to show you, yes, we take the courses here at SAP as well. So I've been really pleased with the quality of the content. I don't say that just because I'm an SAP person and they make me say that or something like that. There's some really good insights, basics about the cloud application programming model. This past week was about data modeling and tips and tricks in best practices in your CDS data modeling. Like I said, really impressed by the quality of the course. Highly recommend it to anybody who has even a passing interest in the cloud application programming model. There's some very nice exercises that you can follow along with. They can all be done. They're showing them in the video with the Business Application Studio, so you can do them there. You can do them in VS Code. Once again, just highly recommend it. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about, this comes from Lucia, a former SAP employee, now works for Google, but still doing stuff that combines the SAP world and the Google world. And she recently created a quick Glabs tutorial. Now, this is Google's part of their e-learning offering, where you can go through a tutorial kind of similar to the SAP Developer Center. But in this case, specifically to the Click Labs, they supply like the server backend temporarily while you do the tutorial, which is a pretty nice feature. And in addition to the tutorial that she just put out there, that is SAP HANA based, and then using Google Cloud Run to do some development with the HANA database. They're also offering this learning resources at no cost for 30 days. So if you have a little time on your hands and want to go through another tutorial, maybe you've gone through all the tutorials in the SAP Developer Center and you're looking for something new to do, this is a great HANA tutorial that you can try out here for free as well. So you still have a few days to sign up for that. And the last little promotional item that I wanted to put out here is we are now doing the second Community Coding Challenge. The first one, which was based in ABAP, was very popular. We had a lot of fun doing it. I hope you guys had a lot of fun as well. This time we thought we'd mix things up. DJ created the challenge this time, and it is a JavaScript-based challenge. And knowing DJ, it's very math-based and a math puzzle. This seems to be DJ's forte, but fun little challenge, similar rules, but read through the blog. I'll put this blog link in the show notes from today's episode as well. We've also been promoting on social media and things like that. But if you are interested in taking a crack at a JavaScript-based coding challenge, here's your chance. And similar to the previous coding challenge, the fabulous rewards of a no prize. So it's all for fun and games, but yeah, it's something that can be fun and educational at the same time, I hope. All right. So that brings us through our announcements. And I wanted to pick up where we left off. And maybe I'll just recap last week's episode. Last week's episode, we were really kind of trying to introduce you to Kyma, SAP's open source project, and soon to be managed service as part of the SAP Cloud Platform that offers a Kubernetes-based server runtime and also a lot of additional functionality, not just a hosted Kubernetes, but also a collection of open source components, and then some of our own open source glue to tie these components together to help you create services, to consume services, to do serverless functions. And as we said, it's a bit of an alternative runtime. You know, if we look at Cloud Platform today, we have ABAP and we have Cloud Foundry as the two main platform runtimes in that platform, and now we're basically adding a Kubernetes runtime based upon Kyma, and gives you a range of options, particularly if you have existing cloud native content, you want to bring it over and run it in this environment, interact with other SAP software. Kyma is a great way to do that. Now, in last week's episode, we were primarily focused on how to get a local development environment set up, and that's what we went through. We went through all the steps of how to install the prerequisites, how to get a local Kubernetes server running on our laptop in the form of Minikube, and all the other development prerequisites. And then, of course, we installed Kyma. It went out and grabbed a bunch of open source components like Istio and Knative and as I said, some of its own components, installed it all into that Kubernetes cluster, and then also we have the Kyma Console, a nice administrative UI that allows us to work with that. Now, where we want to pick up, I left things exactly as they were at the end of the last episode. I've not touched this instance since then. I did a save to my VM, my Minikube VM, and now we want to go ahead and just restart that. And we'll give that a moment to restore from the disk image. If you remember last time, I did that at the end of the session. I did not shut down Minikube. I did not stop Kyma. I simply did a save on the VM that is running Minikube, and that created a disk image of the memory state, and then stopped the VM, so it freed up all the system resources. But now I'm able to just start it back up and restores into memory from that disk image. And what we should see here, everything went okay, is I can go immediately back to the Kyma console, and everything is already running. So I don't have any long startup times or having to wait on reprovisioning or anything like that. The system is restored back to its exact state. The other thing that's nice about this that I like is now I have these checkpoints, and if I would completely screw something up in my development, rather than wiping out Minikube and starting over, I can just restore back from that checkpoint, and it's just about as fast. So I really like this way of working inside these VMs behind the scenes here, particularly in an environment like this, where maybe I want to try out updating Kyma or updating Minikube or something like that, and maybe I don't want to run the risk of breaking some development that I've already done. I've got a demo in progress. I could use these checkpoints to switch back and forth between different states and do testing and not be worried that I'm going to completely break the system or anything. All right, so we have our Kyma console, and as you see here, we don't have anything running in it yet. There are no namespaces. This is completely empty at this point. All we've done is set up a server environment. So what we want to do to learn a little bit more about Kyma now is we want to develop something and deploy it to Kyma. And we'll see the process of doing deployment. And we're going to walk through this relatively slowly so that I can explain a lot of the concepts along the way. So, if I were just banging away doing this demo, and the actual steps, it might be just a 10-minute demo, but I want to explain a lot of the concepts, because especially if you're new to Kubernetes, cloud native development in general, there's a lot of new concepts, and not necessarily totally new concepts, but maybe a different naming, a different way of doing things, and I'll try to draw some correlations to maybe Cloud Foundry, where some of you are maybe already familiar. But what we want to do is I want to just take you through one of the public tutorials. I thought that would be a good point to start. Of course, you can the echo has come back. I just saw in the text that the echo has come back. I don't know, but it wasn't there in the beginning. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do about it then. Maybe I'll have to check back at the end, but maybe if others are hearing an echo on the audio, let me know, because I don't think it was there at the beginning. All right, sorry about that. We'll check on the audio again in a minute. But what I was saying here is, if you want to follow along with the tutorial, you can of course go to github.com, Kyma Incubator, and there's a couple of examples or tutorials here in the examples folder. We're going to go through the person service. I'll put this link in the show notes as well. Just put it out there in the chat now, but I'll also put it in the show notes in case anybody wanted to follow along. Yes, at some point the echo returned. Yeah, then I have no idea what's going on there. Let's see. Maybe that will help. I hope my audio didn't completely go away. Yeah, so I don't want to distract things too much, but I would like to figure out what's going on with the audio at some point. Why it starts off fine and why it comes out. Oh, someone else doesn't hear the echo. Lucia. All right. Well, we'll leave that for another time to figure out. For now, let's go ahead and dive into this example. First thing that I wanted to do is I actually want to clone this GitHub repository. So all the instructions here are in the README, but also all the source code and deployment descriptor files and things like that are here. We're going to need a local copy of this. Now, I personally use, let's see here. I personally use, where'd it go? Oh, it's over in my other window here. Sorry. I like GitHub Desktop, and with this tool, just helps you manage all of your cloned GitHub repositories. I've got quite a few that I've got cloned in different states and from different repos. I like the fact that I can see them all in one place. It's very easy to clone a new repository. You just say clone repository and give it the URL. I don't know if DJ is watching this morning, but he probably is cringing because he'd rather do this from the command line. GitHub command line tools are great as well. I use those sometime, but I like the fact that I can get a visual overview of everything that I've got and where they came from. I've already cloned the Kyma Incubator one here, and I have the examples. I also like the fact I can just right mouse click and say open in VS Code or Explorer, whatever I want to do. See the change and change logs and things like that. But I have actually already opened this in VS Code, and I just want to show you I've got the code here ready to go. Now I will say for today's example, they've got all the Java source code, and part of the tutorial is actually building the Java application, looking into the Java source code. I'm not going to go into that level of detail here today on this video. It might be interesting to look at some of the Java source code, the way they coded their service, But for today, I really want to focus on what it's like to do the deployment, whether it's a Java or Node.js or whatever language. The deployment actions and how you interact with the deployed service on Kyma are the same, and that's the part I want to focus on today. So let's just walk through this tutorial. Yes, the prerequisites, you have to install Kyma. We did. That was the last video. This tutorial, the other reason I chose this tutorial, it was very recently upgraded, and it matches the latest version of Kyma 1.11. So I had really good experience going through this tutorial. Everything matched up perfectly to the version that I was running, and I didn't have any problems. So I recommend starting with this tutorial for that reason. Tools required. Well, most of these we already got in last week's video. We have already installed kubectl. We have Helm installed, and yes, I did install the 2.x version. If you install 3, the latest version of Helm, it will not match up to the steps in this tutorial. Helm 2 and Helm 3 are pretty different from everything I've seen, and yeah, that would definitely mess you up if you don't match up the Helm version. It says Node.js 8. I actually have Node.js 12 installed on my local machine. Didn't have any problems with that. To do some of the testing, there's different ways that you can do the testing. For instance, you can use the curl command line, the JQ command line tool. I have both those installed already. It's just part of my development environment. I use Postman instead of some of these tools in other instances. Basically, just need some tools to be able to test REST services. So we're not locked into those tools, but if you're already familiar with doing some REST testing from the browser or Postman or whatever tool you find comfortable, you'll be fine here. And then finally, the Java tools. If you're going to rebuild the service itself from the source code, then yes, you're going to need the Java JDK and Maven, a Java IDE, and then you're going to have to publish that to Docker. But what I found is the Kyma team has already supplied a central Docker container with this Java service built. So if you don't want to go through building the Java service from source code yourself, you can basically skip that step, and they already have it done for you and published into Docker. That way you don't have to worry about getting your own Docker account and publishing to Docker and things like that. You can use the one they provided. I also found if you're maybe not that strong a Java developer like myself, I try not to spend much time in the Java world. I much prefer Node.js development. I wasn't particularly interested in the Java specifics, but I was interested in going through the overall tutorial. Connect to your Kyma instance. We actually did this at the end of last week as well, where I, just to recap here, I went into settings, and I did download my kube config, and that was how we were able to connect. And just double check this, kubectl, let's just do version here. Yes, and I am reconnected to the server version, and everything is working fine. So I'm talking to the Kubernetes instance, but going through the Kyma authentication there to get to my Kubernetes cluster. All right. Now, the other thing that I'll say about the instructions, if you go through this tutorial, there are 2 approaches that you could use. You could be developing locally. That's Minikube. And that's what we're doing here. Or you could have deployed Kubernetes on a cluster, so meaning one of the hyperscalers, so a full server installation of Kyma as opposed to a local development environment. And in many cases, in this tutorial, there are different steps and there's different configuration files. If I go back over to here, you'll see that we have some of these configuration files that we're going to use for deployment. There are local versions and there are cluster versions. So it's just important that you grab the right one for what you're doing. And we're going to do this on Minikube, so we're going to stick to all these local versions, right? All right. First thing we need to do is we need to create a namespace in Kyma. And this is just a way of separating out your services and resources so they're grouped together, just logically more than anything. That helps us when we do administration to not have to look at every service deployed on our cluster, but we can focus in on just the service and resources for a particular application or a particular team, however you want to separate things out. So we're going to go ahead and we can just do this, and I like this fact. Some of these commands we're going to do from kubectl, so directly going into the Kyma, going directly in through Kubernetes, and not Kyma specific, but then you'll see how they are surfaced in say, the Kyma administrative UI. So I'll come here and I'll say kubectl, create namespace, let's call this person service. And it just created the namespace. And now, when I refresh the UI, you can see we now have a new namespace. And when we're doing administration, we can drill into just that namespace, and then we're seeing just the instances or the pods, the services, the resources, the config maps, just the parts of my application, or just the parts on the Kubernetes cluster that are part of this particular application. So we've sort of zoomed in on what we're working on here. All right, next step is we need some persistence. So here we want to install MongoDB as our little local test persistence for this particular service. Now, the one thing that the tutorial points out is we're going to install Mongo, but Mongo is not actually completely compatible with Istio. Istio creates a service mesh. It creates sidecars of services to try to control the throttling of communication and the security setup and things like that. But not every service in the way that it works, every open source service may not be compatible with that. So what we want to do here is basically we're going to set some configuration. And one of the things about Kubernetes you find is a lot of the configuration is done in YAML files, and then you just apply that configuration to either, like we're doing here, we're going to apply it to our entire namespace, and then every service in that namespace will inherit that or be affected by that configuration. We could apply configuration to particular services or particular pods, deployments, as you'll see a little bit later. But what we want is we want this destination rule Mongo. So let's go ahead and look at that here. Destination rule Mongo. Destination rule Mongo. And this is what a lot of Kubernetes configuration files look like. They are YAML. If you've done Cloud Foundry development, this probably looks pretty similar to, say, the MTA YAML file. And actually, in many cases, it serves much the same purpose. It's describing your service, it's describing your resource, or it's describing some, in this case, rule that we want to set. And basically, we're going to create a rule in our namespace that says, for a service running with this name, first MongoDB person service, that we want to disable TLS on the traffic policy. We're specifying the port we want it to run on, but this is going to basically cause Istio to allow Mongo to be compatible with Istio in this case. Okay, so we're going to adjust the networking settings that wrap this particular service before we install the service. So that's important. So we'll just come here. So let's grab this command. Not my day for cut and paste, is it? There we are. So we'll issue this command. It will apply. Actually, first, I need to be in my folder. That's referencing the file, so I've got to go to that particular file. examples person service. There we are. Yeah, so I'm in that same folder here. I've got all these configuration files. Now I can go ahead and issue this command, apply the configuration, and it just applied that configuration to my entire namespace. Okay. Now next, we want to go ahead and install this. Let's see. Yeah, well, we already have our Helm set up. I've already done the Helm configuration, but let's just go ahead and double check it here. We'll do a Helm init client only. Our Helm has been configured. All right, Tiller, not installing Tiller, do it client only because we already have a Helm server built into a Kyma. Now we are able. Let's see. I don't remember having to do this step before. Let's see. Now, we want to go ahead and install. And what we're doing here is we're installing Mongo, and we are using Helm to pull down the Mongo image, if you will, and setting our initial configuration here for the installation. Go ahead and copy that. And now we should be able to apply that configuration to our namespace. There we are. It's created a secret to hold the authentication to access our MongoDB. It's created a persistence volume for persistent storage underneath the service. It has created the service, and it has deployed MongoDB. So we can now go check on that. We see our deployments. Yeah, it's a little. Let's make that a little wider so it doesn't look so weird when we look at it. We see we have first MongoDB deployed. And if we look at our pods, that's the running service, and that's what we want to see. It is running. So we have MongoDB running now. Okay. So that was our first step to get it running. Now we can. Now this next step is if we want to build the whole Java service and deploy it to Docker. But like I said, I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to use the one that's already built and deployed to Docker for us. So we can actually skip the steps where we're going to log into Docker and where we're going to do a Maven to build from the Java source code. Of course, if you want to do those extra steps, that's fine. But what I want to do is I want to use the one that's already built. And what we can see here is if I go to, let's try to get these side by side so I can look at the instructions. So it says to go to Mongo Kubernetes local 1. So Mongo Kubernetes local 1. And a little bit bigger now. All right. There we are. That's good. So Mongo Kubernetes local 1, and it tells you to go and change right here. Change me, replace with a pointer to your Docker repository container. So this is the standard one, person service Mongo Kubernetes, and then the version. I'm actually going to take that because what we can do is we can come over here to Docker Hub. And search for that. And what you see is person service Mongo Kubernetes is deployed here in Docker Hub. And this is the, if you will, the template, the standard implementation of this tutorial that somebody has already built and published for us. Now, if you were to build your own, if you were to go to the Java source code, do Maven build, then you would publish this into your own Docker account, and you'd have your own private version of the Docker container for this service. We did not do that step, so we're just gonna point to the standard one. So actually, we don't need to do this change me here because we're gonna use the standard one. Let me just scan through here real quick, make sure there's no other change me's. No, there are not. So at this point, we can go to the command line, and once again, we're in our person service directory, and we want to go ahead and deploy this. But we do need to adapt them to your environment. So we did the change me in the Kubernetes local one. I want to make sure I don't miss any steps here. To use your own Docker image, that's what we were just talking about. All right, so that looks good. So now we can go ahead, what's this config map that we're going to put in? I don't like to just apply configuration files without looking at them first. So let's look at this Mongo Kubernetes config map local. So let's see what that one does. Okay, so this is just setting up some configuration for the service. This is going to be the host name that it runs on. And this is going to be the MongoDB that it needs to connect to, and the username. Okay, so it's just setting up the configuration for the way the service will run. So let's go ahead and apply that configuration. There we are, it's done. And then let's apply this configuration. And what this is going to do, when I apply these configurations, I'm basically, if this was Cloud Foundry, this would be the equivalent of doing a CF deploy. I'm actually taking that configuration file and I'm deploying it on the service, on the server. The configuration file is telling it what resources to create, what services to go fetch. Now the difference here than say Cloud Foundry, where we have our MTA YAML, but then we pack that in with all the source code. We didn't supply the source code, we just told it where to go get it from Docker in this case. So our source code has already been deployed as a Docker container. It's available in Docker Hub, and we're telling it at deploy time to just go fetch that from Docker. And if we go back to our console now and we look, we already see that it's deployed and it is running. So we now have this person service running here. Let's go to the side again so we can get this side by side. Now you would have to, at this point, go, because we're using hostname based routing, add this service to your Etsy host, or wherever your host file is for your OS. I've already done that in advance. When I created my Kyma cluster, I knew I was going to be doing this tutorial, so I already added that to my host file. And because of that, I can now go to another tab, and I can go to person service, and I can go directly to it. All right, so if I go directly to the URL, the service is responding. It's just saying I just don't have anything hanging off of this this initial URL. So let's add on. What is it telling? Add on a Swagger. So it's got a nice Swagger UI built into it. Now that's part of the service itself. That's something somebody coded into the service. So that Java code that was deployed into Docker, that's what's supplying this functionality. But now we've deployed it onto Kyma, so it's running off of our Kubernetes server, and it has all the various advantages that Kyma provides in that it's actually running behind an Istio sidecar, which is throttling communications, it's scaling, it's handling the security processing, so that our particular application doesn't need to do all those things. Now this is similar, not exactly, but this is very similar to when you deploy something in Cloud Foundry, and in the SAP case, we have the application router. And we surround our service with the application router, and therefore the application router takes care of like the security token processing, and does some throttling and scaling and things like that. We sort of get that for free, if you will, or we get it automatically in the Kyma environment. When we deploy our service, we don't need to specify that outer service, that wrapping service, or the app router, or anything like that. It gets it automatically applied. Kyma does when it deploys the service, and we can see that. See that a little bit here. We can just see that. We can see that through the configuration, the label configuration that's been applied. We can see that it's that the security is provided by Istio. So we have that Istio service running around our service, and that's part of the benefit of using Kyma. Kubernetes in general is it creates a service mesh. We'll see later. This also helps with service-to-service communication as well. But even in our single scenario, we've really created a very robust cloud-native kind of service that responds to dynamic scale, attacks, and things like that, without having to do all that cloud-native coding in our source code itself. And I know we didn't take a close look at the Java source code, but if you want to study that yourself, you'll see that there's not we're not having to code all that redundancy, scaling, and stuff like that in the service itself. It's provided by the overall environment. And we can go ahead and test here. We should test some of these services. Let's go into our person service, and we'll see, like, we have a Git API here. Let's just go ahead and try out the person service, execute, and yes, this is good, because now not only have we tested that we can call our service, we got a response back, we got JSON back, but this also tested to make sure that the service is connected to the underlying MongoDB, because that's where the data is actually stored. When we created the MongoDB, it also got populated with some initial data, and we see here that we're able to retrieve that data. But we also see here in some of the header information that we're actually connecting through Istio. We're not talking directly to our service. We are going through a proxy that protects our service, but we didn't have to specify that. We didn't have to configure that. Once again, that's all provided by the Kyma environment. And that's some of the advantages to using Kyma over raw Kubernetes, is we didn't have to do anything to configure the Istio, the sidecar. That was largely all taken care of for us by Kyma. So we could test these others. If you've worked with Swagger UI before, you know it's a very nice discovery and test framework. Not specific to Kyma. You can do Swagger UI in your own services. I've done blogs before about how to do Swagger UI with CAP, for instance, but that allows us to interact with our services to test them. So we've got our service deployed. We've tested it. That's nice. That's very basic. But what we'd like to do now is see how Kyma can also consume services. Now this is going to be a little bit artificial, if you will, because rather than what you would normally do is you'd probably be calling out to some other service, right? You'd be calling and consuming a service from S4 or a business partner or something like that, someone outside your company. To keep the tutorial simple, what we're going to do is we're going to take the service that we just deployed on Kyma, and we're going to consume it on Kyma as though it's coming from the outside. And I know that can be a little confusing at first. You might go through this and you go, this doesn't make sense. I've deployed on this server. Why would I consume on the same server? That is simply for educational purposes, to keep everything self-contained in a single development environment. But the steps that we're going to use to consume that service, to discover it and consume it, are exactly the same, whether it would be installed locally or whether it would be coming from completely outside our system, right? So don't get too hung up I know the first time I read through this, I was like, what am I doing here? Why am I establishing a trust and a connection to a local service? Of course, you might do that in a large application where you have distributed microservices. You might consume a service from the same server, but don't be too hung up on that, right? Just pretend this is coming from somewhere else, and I think that you'll get a little clearer picture. But what we want to do here is we want to discover the service that has already been deployed, and we want to establish a trust, so exchange the certificates so that we can do authenticated communication between the two, not just authenticated, but SSL, and we're not setting up basic authentication, exchanging passwords and stuff like that. We're going to change certificates, and then be able to exchange events between the two services as well. And what that's going to require us to do is we need to adjust our service and expose the Kyma connector. So it's like a little API that we're going to add to our deployed Java service that's going to make it discoverable, easily discoverable by Kyma, and make it sort of a one-click effort to be able to connect these two things. So what we want to do here is first we want to create a new application on Kyma that's going to reference our remote application. So what we can do here is, once again, we can either do this from the UI, or we can do this from the command line. But let's see it from the command line. So we're going to apply this app person service. So app person service. And basically we're just saying we want to create an application. This is going to be the name, and this is the gateway that it's going to connect to. So pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and kubectl apply app person service YAML. And it just created the application. To verify that, let's go back here to our applications, and we see we now have this person service application. It's not serving yet. We'll give it a second here to come up fully. So this is going to be like a I don't know if this is the exact right terminology, but this is like a local proxy for a remote service, right? And we're creating the proxy first that we're going to be able to connect through, and then we'll connect it to, or pair it with the remote service. Yeah, so now it's serving. It doesn't really do anything yet because it's not paired to anything. So let's go through the steps to pair it next. So we want to create configuration here first. So let's go have a look at. So we have this registration. We have registration file JSON. This has all the configuration here for connecting to the service. So let's go ahead and apply that. I don't want to type all this. So let's copy that. So it has now created a registration file for that service. I don't know. I don't think I checked it at this point. I don't know if we see anything different in the console. I don't think we do yet at this point. So let's keep going here. Now we want to enable the application connector endpoints. So we want to reconfigure the endpoints of our service to expose that additional Kyma connector API. So we want to come here, make sure I'm not missing any steps. Yeah, so we want to come here, and we want to use Mongo Kubernetes Local 2. So if we come back here, Mongo Kubernetes Local 2. Now, we already deployed the service, our person service, the pods and the deployment with Kubernetes Mongo Kubernetes Local 1. Now what we want to do is we want to reconfigure that service, and we want to change it. So we have a different configuration file. Of course, you could edit the initial one, but for learning purposes, we put each step here into a different configuration file. But what we want to do here is we just want to add to that person service. We want to expose that additional API. In which case we need to come here and we also need to do the replace. But we're not going to change the Docker container. We're still going to use the central Docker container. But now we need to create a host alias. And we need to connect it to our Minikube IP address. And let me just show you there. Let's double check this. Oh, shoot! I lost my terminal window there. Sorry about that. There, now we're back to the right spot. But let's just check our IP address. Let's issue Minikube IP, and that will tell us the IP address that we're running on here. And 239. Yes, I already updated this in advance, but you would have to update this if you were going through the tutorial. So you would check your IP address at this point, and you would change the IP address here. That way, it's going to point. It's going to proxy the right service. You know, instead of, if this was an actual external service, we would have to put the host name or IP address of that external service, right? So at this point, this looks good. I would save this. I haven't made any changes, so I don't need to save it. And now we're going to come back here and we're going to apply this configuration. There we are. It's reconfigured, and what we're going to see, if we do this fast enough, if we go into our person service and we look at our deployments, yeah, we see the person service 1 of 2. We actually have 2 of them running, just temporarily here, because what it's doing is it's starting up the new version, but it's letting the old version remain until the new version is established and running correctly. So we get a very clean handover here. And there you see it refreshed on its own there. And what you see is once the new version is fully established and ready to respond to request, then it can kill the old version. And it's that Istio sidecar and the functionality provided by Kyma that's routing the request. And you can even do, you can get more advanced when you make changes. You can send some of your request to the new version of the service, some to the old. You can do A/B testing and stage switchovers. A lot of really cool built-in functionality. This is some of the really the reasons that people use Kubernetes generally and Kyma specifically to make this very easy to tap in that kind of functionality. But we have our new version of the person service deployed now. And if we come here and we refresh, what we see is we have a whole new API, the Application Connector API. This is provided by the Kyma connector, and this is going to make it really easy to discover our service from Kyma and configure it in Kyma Console to be able to call it remotely. I just want to do a real quick test here. I want to make sure that our basic functionality is still working. When I was doing the testing, the first time I did the tutorial, I missed a step, I screwed up, and then I broke my connection to my MongoDB. And then at this point, things stopped working. And then when I went to do the application connector to discover the service, it didn't work because it couldn't talk to the persistence. I just want to make sure that I haven't messed anything up, which I have not, at least so far, I hope. I am still able to call the person service. So that's good. So the last thing I want to do here is now we want to pair it with Kyma. And there's a manual process that you can do to download certificates and exchange the certificates, and it's all very complicated to edit the certificates. Luckily, we don't have to do that complicated manual setup. There's an automated pairing that will allow us to discover our remote service, and that's the process that we want to go through here. This is very cool. So what I can come here to do is I'll come back to my applications. And remember, this is my little proxy application for my remote person service. And I'm going to go ahead into it. And I'm going to say I want to connect. Now I want to connect up the actual endpoint for that application. So I'm going to say connect application. So I get the URL that can be used to perform a connection. I'm just going to do copy to clipboard. And now what I can do is I can go back over to Swagger, and I can go to this application connector API, and we can go to the automatic registration, and we just need to change this URL and give it the URL. So what we're doing is we're taking our service, which remember could be remotely, that now has this Kyma connector API built into it. And I just going to call an endpoint of that API, and I'm going to give it the URL for my Kyma server where I want it to register itself, and the specific application endpoint that I want it to register as that will be its proxy. And when I do this, when I execute this, if it all works correctly, fingers crossed, yes, that looks good, good. That's exactly what should happen. It has done all the communication to Kyma, and it has said, hey, Kyma, I'm this service. I have this metadata. Here's my security tokens. Let's create a trust. And what we now see, if we go back to Kyma, and I say OK, and what we should see here is now we can see that the remote person service is attached. We can call APIs of it, and we can get events from it. Okay, and at this point, we also need to create a binding for this. So what we have is we have another configuration file. We just want to app person service namespace map. So we're just going to create a mapping there. So let's come here to the command line. And we have created our mapping. And if I refresh, now we have a mapping to person service. We have service bindings and event bindings, so the two are fully connected. And what we see here is actually, I think, if we were to go, oh yeah, now we can come to our person service and go into our service catalog. And as far as this namespace is concerned, the service catalog now contains our person service. And we have the ability to do things like call it via Kyma here. So let's come down here to our person. And we're just seeing the, now the Swagger is being provided here within the Kyma Console. And we have the ability to see our service. So it's fully connected here. So we're nearly out of time for this week, and there's so much more that we can explore with Kyma. This is like the hello world, right? And we've deployed a service, a little more complex than a hello world, but we've deployed the service. We have connected it up. We're able to now call a remote service from Kyma. And if you were to continue on with this tutorial, we can see that we're able to then extend the service with some additional local functionality via a Lambda or serverless function. And maybe we'll return in another couple weeks and do the rest of this tutorial. But I hope, at least this is giving you some idea of what the environment is, how to get started with development, the very basics of deploying a service and consuming a service. I know some of the things that I want to do down the road personally, my own exploration. Yes, I want to continue with this tutorial. Last year I did some work. I wrote a blog on SCN, and I can put a link to that as well, where I wrote a CAP application connecting to HANA, and I deployed it to Kyma as well, and that was Node.js based. That's some things I wanna do in the future as well. But for this point, hopefully I've shared enough with you to help you get started and at least doing your own exploration. As I said, on the Allbot Freak Show, we're going to bounce around from topic to topic. Next week, I'm going to have Rich Hallman on as a guest, and we're going to do some more ABOP discussions about object-oriented techniques and some of the things that have fallen by the wayside over the years. But we will certainly return to the Kyma topic and the HANA topics, CAP in the future, and in particular, I like to spend time on things where we connect things together, right? So I would very much like to return to the Kyma topic in a few weeks and show you how you can do some CAP, how you can connect to HANA, how you can maybe consume an ABOP service and begin to tie a lot of these different technologies together for you. But with that, thanks for joining us for another episode of the ABOP Freak Show. I hope you have enjoyed this little first exploration into the world of Kyma and doing local development on Minikube, a little taste of the Kubernetes side of the industry as well. Hope everybody wasn't too overwhelmed by many of the different terms and new concepts, but I think you'll find once you spend a little time with it, a lot of correlations that can be drawn to things that you already know. It's different approaches, but a lot of your knowledge can be reused here. Join us again next week. As I said, we're going to dip our toes back into the ABOP pool next week and with Rich as our guest. And until then, thanks for joining and have fun coding.